Hello, everyone. Thank you, Meg, for the introduction, and thank you, Rachel, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. It must be a pretty busy couple of weeks for you. Now, obviously, you have a long and storied career in climate finance and climate diplomacy, but you've just started a new role as the UK's special envoy. Tell us what that involves exactly.
Well, just a few weeks into the job, and obviously we have a government that was elected on a net zero mandate. It campaigned on it, and we have a Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary that are putting climate and nature at the heart of British foreign policy. So this is an external-facing role, really to try to put some additional political bandwidth behind the way in which the reality of climate change will affect everybody, everywhere, every country, and that by making it a priority, we want it to shape the way in which Britain reconnects with the world. In particular, I think our relationship with, for the want of a better expression, the global south, right? This is shaped by the reality of climate change and by the reality of nature and how we protect it. And so I will be focused on finance in particular, which is the theme of this COP, and also really fast-forwarding the energy transition, which are ways in which our sort of domestic situation, where we're pursuing our own energy transformation, our own energy transition, relates to the way in which the world will pursue its energy transition. Well, that's an investment and trade opportunity for the UK, but also we have some know-how and some how-to that we can share with other countries as well.
So as you said, this is a finance COP. I think everyone at this early stage realizes that it's this new finance agreement which will make or break this COP. Is that what success for this COP looks like for you, getting a new collective goal on finance? Is that the key?
Yeah, I think the new collective quantified goal, one of the worst acronyms in a business made up of acronyms, the NCQG. So that's at the heart of it. But there are other things which are really important for finance, including progress on Article 6, which is the article of the Paris Agreement that refers to carbon markets. But on the NCQG, this is about the public funds that come from the countries that historically have been recognised within the Convention as being where the emissions have been generated, to the countries that are experiencing the worst effects of climate change but didn't historically contribute. Of course, we're at a point in time where, since the Convention first came into force and since Paris was agreed 9 years ago, there are many, many other countries that are now growing. Their emissions have grown, so they're now part of the ledger of where the emissions come from. But there are also countries that are also contributing finance in solidarity with others. So when this was written, when the Convention was written in the 1990s, and then when Paris was, we're now in this new world. So the qualified goal has to show where the public money is coming from, but most importantly, in addition, it has to show how that public money is going to leverage private investment. And that will come from many, many different parts of the world and many, many different sectors of the financial sector. And the final thing I think to say about the public money and the private money is that it has to be delivered in ways where countries feel that they own their own plans, right? And then that they're able to mobilize their own domestic capital markets, their own domestic savings, and then have easier access to international investment and easier access to some of the global funds that exist. And what we hear from many emerging markets and developing economies is that the access to the finance, as well as the actual sum of the finance, is important.
I'd like to talk about that more in a minute, actually, because I think it's a really important point. But first of all, how do we solve the China problem? Clearly, as you alluded to, a lot of this public money has come mostly actually from European and other Western, for want of a better word, countries. But since this was negotiated, China, of course, has become a much richer country. It's emerged as the world's biggest emitter. I think a lot of electorates would say, why should we pay in if China's not paying in? Is there a diplomatic solution to that, and what does it look like?
So in climate negotiations, right, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So in the negotiations around the goal, the NCQG, there will be a discussion around the quantum, So how much public money? There will be discussion about layers above or below, however you want to draw it, of different forms of public money, different forms of private investment, different forms of finance. And then there's a question of access, which we will keep over there. And then there's a question of the contributor, what's called the contributor base. Now, there are countries that contribute. China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, other emerging economies and other economies which now are major emitters, they do contribute. They contribute in different channels and in different ways. Yep. Now, the art of diplomacy is that somewhere in there is language which will be comfortable for everybody. And I think that everybody who's here knows that if we don't get a strong and ambitious agreement on the quantifiable goal, it makes the task of next year really difficult. Next year, everybody has to be coming forward with their nationally determined, their national plan. It has to be ambitious. We have to close the ambition gap between where we are and where we need to be. And for many emerging markets and developing economies, if there isn't a sort of financial package, then they feel they're basically writing plans which are unfunded or will be unfunded. And the Chinese understand that as much as anybody else does.
So you think there is a solution? There is a landing zone there that...
Well, we're on day 3 of the negotiations, so it's way too early to cast but the UK is here determined to play a positive role in trying to get to a strong agreement.
So let's go back to what you said between the difference between the money and how to use the money, because I think that's a really important conversation to have, and part of your background is at the World Bank, which is distributing money. What does good climate finance look like for developing countries? What are the policies that make the money as useful as possible? I know that's a big question, but
no, it's a great question. It's a great question. So I think you have to think about this in 2 ways. There's climate finance, which is the negotiation under the Paris Agreement around who contributes what, how does it get transferred, who gets to use it, and for what purposes, and how we count it, and even who counts it, right? That's climate finance. Then there's financing the climate crisis, right? And this is where we get into the question of debt sustainability and the fact that for many countries, they don't have the fiscal space and they don't have the resources to be able to invest in their own resilience and their own green growth and investment strategies. And so we have to deal with debt and liquidity stress. We have to deal with their access to large pools of investment capital or concessional finance, which come through the multilateral development banks. And at the beginning of December, the world will arrive in South Korea to negotiate the terms of the International Development Association, IDA, which is the biggest pot of concessional money that developing countries can get their hands on. And so all of these things, and then, of course, the cost of capital, the regulations in place that allow you to use your own domestic savings and capital markets, credit enhancements so that you're investing in your own energy transition, and then the international finance that has to come through different mechanisms, and basically taking the capital that is stored in the world in different places, from sovereign funds to our own savings, and finding ways to have it, and especially move into emerging markets, developing economies, where the infrastructure and the green growth has to take place. And I think that since Paris and then since Glasgow in COP26 in whenever that was, 2021, there's been a lot of talk about mobilizing private finance, and it's starting to happen, but most of that is still not going to the emerging markets in the way that it needs to. And so, for example, we as the UK have helped the Climate Investment Funds, which is a fund that was established before Paris, which the MDBs in particular can access. And we've helped them look at their portfolio and issue bonds on the base of that portfolio and list that in the London Stock Exchange. So suddenly you take a fund of public money, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of public money from Europe and across the world, Japan, etc., and you take it to the London Stock Exchange and you immediately raise $7.5 billion. And we can do that again and again. So I think we're getting smarter about how to do that, and that's going to be the solution. But I think one of the problems we hear is that for developing countries in these negotiations, they're not necessarily Ministry of Finance officials, right? And there is a sort of extraordinary array of acronyms and mechanisms and funds, and it becomes a little overwhelming. And being able to access that and know that financing is there, and then deal with your own domestic regulatory improvements that would help finance flow. So this is a sort of multifaceted problem that involves a total government approach, a whole of government approach. And here we're dealing with climate finance, but around this negotiation is the need to build a bigger, better, bolder and fairer international financial architecture.
So it's really about making the most of that public capital to unlock, find the mechanism to unlock as much private capital as possible.
Yeah, this is not a story of development and aid.
Yeah.
This is a story of supporting countries' own trade, investment and prosperity plans, and that's going to require highly concessional finance, development aid. That's not unimportant. That has to be, and that has to flow especially to the most vulnerable and those for which the other forms of finance don't flow. But then it's mobilizing our own public, using our own public dollars to leverage into more private investment. And then it's laying the groundwork, the regulatory and financial rules in a country so that its own domestic savings are going into its own future.
If I'm a developing country who has enormous needs for finance, both for mitigation and adaptation, might I say this is an easy answer for countries like the UK to give, and actually what I need is just for you, for these countries, to be more generous? Is this talk about more loans? It might seem a bit easy if I'm a developing country.
So I think that our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, spoke yesterday about the fairness that we know needs to be built into the system that isn't there at the moment. You know, and if you talk to colleagues from the Caribbean, there's more finance leaving the Caribbean in debt service than there is aid and other forms of climate finance moving in. So, you know, we're giving with one hand and we're taking away with the other. So, you know, Mia Motley from Barbados has talked about the Bridgetown Agenda. This is basically, you know, the need to invest in countries and allow them to access the international financial architecture and markets so that they can invest in their own resilience before the storm hits rather than coming in with aid money or with insurance after the storm hits. And so that fairness is something that this government, this UK government, is committed to sort of pursuing now. And, you know, is an important part of our conversation. So, yes, the system is unfair. It's not fit for purpose. And that's been recognised within the G20 for the last 3 years or more. So it was recognised even by the last government. So it's not fit for purpose. Got to make it fit for purpose. But here in COP29, we've got to commit to a big public finance number that can be leveraged for private finance and then make sure it's accessible to countries.
Now, I've managed to go 14 minutes without mentioning a certain US politician, but which I think is a pretty good number. But clearly, we're about to enter 4 years where the US is not going to be engaged as much as the world needs it to be, is going to retreat in many respects, one imagines. How big a problem is it for the agenda that you're trying to pursue that we're going to lose that American role, that American leadership?
Well, I think that the climate crisis is the climate crisis. We're running out of time. I just went to the launch of the carbon budget project, and we're running out of carbon budget, and we haven't peaked emissions. And you know, there isn't a good news story coming out of science at the moment. That does not change, right? What also doesn't change is that the energy transition is underway. What also doesn't change is that even in the United States, the programs that were initiated by the Biden administration are just really gaining ground now, right? And they're going to start being felt by people in all of the states, red or blue now. So that's not going to slow down because there's only one way that this goes, right? Which is we need clean air, we need clean water, we need reliable energy, we need affordable energy, and that's going to come from an increasing mix of clean energy systems. So that doesn't change, and everybody else will just keep going. And I think that the last time there was a wobble from the United States. The argument was really about you want to be leading this transition because then you'll benefit by being competitive. You'll get the better jobs, you get the better investments. You'll be able to be in a stronger position through transition, and that's the position of the British government, which is we want to lead. We want to lead because we want this to be of an extraordinary benefit to British people, right, and to British industry, and to British innovation, and British universities, etc. So for us, and I think for everybody else here, there's only one direction of travel. We're all, on the bus, and if somebody steps off the bus, they'll step back on again at some point because there is only one direction of travel.
And COPs keep going, and
COPs keep going.
And we've got 10 days left of COP29, but let's finish by talking a little bit about. I think many people saw this as an important way station onto to Brazil's COP, which is because of the NDCs and the need for increasing ambition, clearly going to be an important one. And you've spoken well about how the finance agenda here can unlock more ambitious NDCs next year. But I want to talk a little bit about another thing that will be agreed here, it looks like, which is Article 6.
Yeah.
So in Brazil, I think Brazil is going to lead an agenda about how to make keeping the forest pay. Can carbon markets, the Article 6 market, does that have a role to play there, do you think, to unlock flow of capital?
Yeah, I think so, because this is a conundrum for economists, but has now moved to the centre of the political stage, which is we must invest in the carbon sinks that we find in particular in the tropical forests of Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, Indonesia, and other places, Guyana. And if those forests aren't protected, and the people that live in those forests allowed to or supported to live sustainable lives, then we will absolutely fail in our effort to budget carbon, because one thing is to stop fossil fuel emissions, the other is to make sure that those sinks are there. So I think for the Brazilians, putting a focus on nature, but finding ways at scale to finally see resources flowing into the protection of nature before, while it's standing, not just exploiting it once it's been felled, is critical. And obviously Brazil has been a leader in this for many, many years. Brazil, is a big power regionally and globally. We'll be going down to the G20 at the beginning of next week, where Brazilian leadership, they've come out with a strong NDC. We've come out with a strong NDC. The Secretary General will be calling for other G20 countries to come out with strong NDCs. And then imagine that we can get the NDCs closer to where they need to be on the ambition curve, and that we come out with an at-scale sort of system or ability to be able to invest in nature, which carbon markets will be one part. Now, those carbon markets have to be of integrity. We have to fix all of the problems that we've seen in decades of carbon market experimentation under different regimes. But there's no way that we get to success without, as the Secretary General would say, ending our war with nature and finding a way to invest in nature and the people who depend upon it in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Good. We've got 1 minute left, so we're almost done. I think it's hard at the moment for people to be optimistic. I think the political scene is tough. You've talked about the ambition, the gap between ambition and action, and how it's widening, and we're running out of carbon budget. What keeps you optimistic? What are the grounds that you have today here in Baku to be optimistic about where we go from here? Very briefly.
So I believe that hope is stronger than fear. And my hope is in the students that I'm still in touch with, who then you see them graduate and then you see them turning up in all kinds of different roles here. My hope is that as leaders we can be disciplined and focused, and as leaders we can let business do what business does well by setting guardrails and setting clarity about what we expect to happen, and that we can have an engagement with our publics where we are honest about what we face, honest about how we can face it together, and that this is a transition that we can manage our way through, and that young people will lead us through that.
Rachel, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Good luck for the rest of the COP. I hope it ends as well as you hope. Please join me in thanking Rachel Kyte for a very stimulating overview.